right, let's continue with our discussion of legumes. This is mini lecture 2. Here we see some examples of the legume seed pod. We've got some snow peas over there. Maybe you've got some frozen snow peas in your freezer, and those, of course, will split. This looks like some edamame or edamame, depending on whether you're in San Jose or Sapporo. That is the soybean that has been harvested before it's at full maturity, and this is cooked in salty water for about 5 minutes and eaten as a bar food, right? So it's split open, suck it out. It's very delicious. The snow peas can be stir-fried or put on a salad, usually stir-fry. Peanuts, of course, are also a legume. These are generally roasted, but can also be prepared like the edamame by boiling in salty water. However, with peanuts, it takes much longer, probably an hour to 2 hours. And that snack is called boiled peanuts and is delicious. This looks like some string beans that, again, are not mature. So if you took that crop and let it go to full maturity, you could make dried beans in your garden. I'm not sure what this one is. Some other pods that are similar to this that you may see at a grocery store like Vallarta is tamarind. And in the case of tamarind, we use the pulp that's inside the pod, between the pod and the seed. Carob is also in the legume family. There's a pea pod that's just beginning to develop. This might be off of Caesalpinia, where you see the beginning of the development of the seed pod. All right. Palo Verde. This is Mexican Palo Verde. This is one that we'll discuss in our landscape plants. This is native to southwestern United States and is a lovely ornamental tree. We use this in landscaping, and the branches have a weeping sort of form. It will bloom yellow in the summer. I've seen it used in parking lots in Florida where it has a visually cooling or soothing look. There is a cultivar that is thornless, and that is called Desert Museum, named after the Desert Museum in Arizona, outside of Tucson. All right. So we're talking about the legumes. They are important for human nutrition because they provide protein. We've mentioned that. They also are important because they add nitrogen to the soil for the crop that comes after them in a crop rotation. And they're able to add that nitrogen to the soil because of a symbiotic relationship with a bacteria called Rhizobium. So examples include peas, beans. We mentioned some of these. Let's see, we want to be here and here. Beans, peas, peanuts, carob, lentils, soybeans. I mentioned peanut twice. So many of these would be handy for us now if we happen to have them in our pantry. So different legumes are associated with different cultures. For example, in Asia, soybean has often been the legume. In Central America, the pinto bean and a number of other beans. Lentils, more common in Mediterranean area. Garbanzos also. We use some legumes for livestock forage, and those would include alfalfa and clover, so we can allow the cows or goats to eat those. Some are actually lumber. Some make a large enough tree that they are lumber, and of course we use some as ornamental landscape plants. So nearby our laboratory, we have redbud that's blooming in the garden area, and it is blooming around town right now. If you're in a more northern climate, that will be blooming a little later. Right now we're in late March in Central California. Bush lupin is a wildflower that's common in our foothills. If you were to drive up to the foothills and stay in your car or only get out where there are no other people, you might be able to see some bush lupin growing along the hillsides. Wisteria is planted. That is a vine that makes a lot of fragrant flowers. Most of those are done here in the Central Valley at this point. Sometimes they rebloom. If you go over to River Center, north of town, off of Old Friant Road, you can see some white wisteria on those beautiful trellises and arbors that they have out there. All right, all the beans, both green beans and all the dried beans that we've got in our pantry now. Peas, so there's a wide variety of peas. We talked about that in our vegetable section. Peas are going to include the English pea that we eat, where we eat the seed, the snow peas, where we're eating the pod, snap peas, where we're eating a larger pod. It's all the same species, but we've selected them for different purposes. We can also eat the pea tendrils, and you can grow some pea shoots. So if you need some greens, right, if you're staying home the way I am, you can start some pea shoots. Burr clover is the weed that we need to be, one of the weeds we need to be able to identify. And in that case, the fruit is that sticky, spiny, painful burr. All right. You don't want to eat legumes raw in large quantities. All right. So mung bean is the bean that's traditionally used to make bean sprouts. A few raw are fine. It's not clear whether sprouted beans are different than just a soaked bean. You would not want to eat beans that you have just soaked or large quantities of raw beans and peas. A few, no big deal. So here we see the mung bean in the pod. It's generally sold dried. You can cook it like other beans, soak it maybe 3 or 4 hours, and cook it maybe an hour until it's soft. When we're making sprouts like this, they apply pressure to the sprouting seeds, to the germinating seeds, and they do that with, I'm not exactly sure how they do it, but that's what gives it that enlarged root, that more tender, delicious, crispy root. If you sprout some mung beans at home without pressure, they're not going to look quite like this. They're not going to be quite as tender and lush. You can try wrapping some bricks in aluminum foil or something like that to try to put some pressure on them. All right, Rhizobia. I am not going to expect you to know these formulas. So Rhizobia are bacteria that have a symbiotic relationship with the legumes in the roots. And you can tell these nodules from the root knot nodules because they're going to be more round and regular. Also, if you cut them open, you're going to see what looks like blood because there's leg hemoglobin in there that is produced by the bacteria that indicates that it's operating, right? So it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere. The atmosphere is about 75% nitrogen, but we can't get it out. For us, it's just inert. It's coming in as we breathe and going out as we breathe, and we haven't done anything with it. Plants need nitrogen, but they're not able to fix it. They're not able to pull it out of the air. But the Rhizobia are. And so this is the chemical reaction by which those bacteria fix that nitrogen from the air and put it into what we call a mineralized form that the plants can use. Right? So there is our final ammonium form that is useful to the plants. We can purchase that in a big box store like the large hardware stores that you're familiar with, and that has been produced using fossil fuels. There are some organic fertilizers that are high in nitrogen. Those would include blood meal and composted steer manure, chicken manure, all high in nitrogen. All right, so proteins contain amino acids, and amino acids contain nitrogen. You might have noticed that word amino and ammonia that we just looked at. Amino acids contain nitrogen. So because these plants have this symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, they have more nitrogen available to them than they would have otherwise. And therefore, they're able to make more protein than other plants. They're able to store that protein in the seeds. We've already discussed how seeds are going to contain nutrition. They're going to contain an embryo, and they're going to contain the DNA that the germinating plant will need. So the legumes are able to put more protein into their seeds. That allows the whole group of plants to be more successful. That's why we've got so many species of legumes, and it's why humans find legumes so useful. All right, so the plant is providing carbohydrates to the bacteria. The bacteria is providing nitrogen to the plants. So that's why it's called a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. It's good for both organisms. All right, so because of this relationship, the legumes have evolved to produce a higher protein seed. Legumes are good for crop rotation because they're going to add nitrogen to the soil. The Native Americans used a three-sister cropping system that included corn, beans, and squash. The corn provided a trellis for the beans. The beans provided the nitrogen, and the squash or pumpkins, large leaves, provided a mulch to minimize weeds. All right, here we see the nodules, and that these are more regular in shape than the root knot nematode infested roots that we saw earlier, right? So it's just a nodule on the root. It's not a distortion of the entire root. So if you're here in the Central Valley, you could pull up a burr clover and look at the nodule and see if it is pink or red inside. So various members of this family originated in different parts of the world. Soybean from China, as we mentioned, peanuts from South America. The whole genus Phaseolus, which would include the pinto beans, were from North and South America. Garbanzo bean, as we mentioned, from Mediterranean. Fava bean, which will grow in cooler climates or cooler weather, from Afghanistan. And pea and lentil from Mediterranean and Near East. So most cultures had both a legume and a grain. So grains are seeds of the grass family, and they provided carbohydrate in the diet, and the legumes provided the protein. So that's what we just said. Contemporary uses for legumes include vegetable oil and animal feed. In the case of Asia, the grain would of course been rice. In Central America, that would have been corn